I have a tendency to cover some pretty over-the-top and brutal things on this channel. Given the name of the series, that's to be expected, I guess. But today, I thought I'd shift my focus to something a little less extreme and in your face. Don't get me wrong, when things kick off in this movie, they really kick off and get wild. But a large portion of the film is focused on the mental brutality and trauma of a family suffering a tragic and unfortunate loss. Hereditary is something that I've been meaning to watch ever since it came out, and for one reason or another, it's something that I never really got around to doing. So with me doing this series of subjecting viewers to horrific things that movies have to offer, there's no better time than now. But before we jump into that, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN is a service designed to help keep you safe online, while at the same time unlocking the web to give you access to region-locked content. Developed by top cybersecurity specialists and IT engineers in 2020, Atlas VPN was created to make the internet accessible and secure for everyone. The service encrypts your data and hides your virtual location, so when you connect to one of their VPN servers, your device is given a new IP and DNS address. All of the traffic is then encrypted and routed towards the VPN server. When the traffic arrives at the server, the VPN decrypts the information and allows the traffic to access the desired destination. If you ever connect to public Wi-Fi, say in a coffee shop or on a train for example, you're essentially broadcasting your data to everybody around you for people to then go and do whatever they want with it. But Atlas VPN ensures that your data and internet traffic is safe. Not only is it a great way to keep your information private from individuals or companies, but the service also comes with a myriad of different benefits. Its new third-party tracker blocker protects you from pesky trackers around the web that would otherwise keep track of your online activities and then sell that data off to companies or advertisers. As well as its new data breach monitor, a security feature designed to track any of your data breaches across the web by scanning leaked databases across the web and then informing you if any of your information has been leaked so you can adequately protect yourself. And something that is incredibly important to me is getting access to shows or movies that otherwise might be region locked in my area. For example, want to watch something that's exclusive to US Netflix, but you're not in the States? Well, hop on Atlas VPN, change your region, and the world will open up to you, giving you access across all of your devices. So if you're interested in what Atlas VPN has to offer, then click the link in the description, because currently, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount for their 3-year deal for just $1.39 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Click that link to find out more. Hereditary begins with us being introduced to the Graham family. The father Steve, the mother Annie, the son Peter, and the daughter Charlie. The family are suffering from the recent loss of their grandmother, so right away, we're not seeing these characters in the happiest of times. It's clear that they've also got some internal struggles going on between them. They all clearly love each other, but you can't help but feel like they're all ever so slightly disconnected from each other, which in turn makes for quite a somber feeling. They attend the funeral for their grandmother, and we learn a little about them as people. Annie, the mother of the family, was actually quite estranged from her late mother, with them really never getting on too well, leaving her unsure as how she's supposed to feel about this loss. On the other hand, we learn that Charlie was actually very close to her grandmother, so much in fact that the grandmother wouldn't let Annie feed her own daughter, with her doing it instead. Kinda weird. The movie also makes a point to inform us that Charlie is allergic to nuts. I'm sure that'll have no relevance to anything. Annie specializes in creating these miniature model sets from home, and as we see her about to leave her workshop for the night, as she turns the light off, she sees what she believes to be her mother standing in the corner of the room, staring back at her. But after turning the lights back on, it reveals it to be nothing. We then see that both Charlie and Peter are both really easily distracted in class, with neither of them really paying that much attention. While Charlie is being told off for not paying attention, we see a bird fly straight into the classroom window, killing it. This sparks Charlie's interest, because after the class, we see her approach the dead bird, take out a pair of scissors, and decapitate the animal like it's a French guillotine victim. Because that's totally normal. You'll come to notice that this movie kinda has a thing for heads being forcibly removed. Later that evening, while back at home, Steve receives a phone call from the cemetery, informing him that his mother-in-law's grave has been desecrated. And by desecrated, I mean someone just straight up stole the body. We then get to see what Charlie wanted that bird head for. She seems to be using it to create some kind of toy or model using a glue gun. That's what the kids do for fun these days. All the while, it becomes apparent that she has some kind of distinctive clicking tick. Sorta like a Charlie detector. You hear that noise, and you know there's a weird kid cutting heads off animals around here somewhere. We then see Charlie's older brother Peter asking his mother if he can borrow her car, lying to her, saying it so he can go to some kind of school barbecue event that's definitely not a party with teenagers drinking. Annie agrees to this, but essentially forces Charlie to tag along with him, although Charlie doesn't really want to go. They arrive at the party, and in typical teenage boy fashion, Peter rather awkwardly attempts to talk to a girl he likes, embarrassingly fumbling over his words until he eventually invites her to go for a smoke. In the process, forcing his younger and clearly vulnerable sister to stay downstairs and eat some chocolate cake while he goes upstairs with his friends and this girl. The only problem being, there's nuts in that cake, and established earlier, we know that Charlie is allergic to nuts. Yeah, nice one, Peter. Don't do drugs, kids. After eating the cake and suffering downstairs on her own for a while, eventually, this poor girl makes it clear to Peter that something is very wrong. So he picks her up, rushes her out of there, and puts his foot down, speeding towards the hospital. The anxiety and tension is high, as we can see Charlie suffocating in the back seat, kicking at the door and clawing at her throat as she attempts to let air into her lungs. We now see that Peter has reached speeds of 80 miles per hour as he's barreling towards this hospital, and in an attempt to get some air, Charlie opens the car window and begins to hang her head out of it. Suddenly, Peter swerves to avoid a dead animal in the road, quickly followed by a loud and sudden thud as Charlie's head collides with a telephone pole at 80 miles per hour. Peter slams on the brakes and stares blankly ahead in a state of complete shock as he's aware that something absolutely horrific has just happened. The car is completely silent apart from the muted pants of Peter's heavy breathing. You can no longer hear Charlie in the back seat struggling for air. In a state of horror, unable to bring himself to even turn around and check on his sister, Peter begins to slowly drive away. He arrives at home and parks the car. He walks up the stairs, as you can then hear the parents from their bedroom, relieved that their two children have made it home safely. He walks into his room and then just lies down. Peter stays in that position, motionless all night, staring blankly ahead at the wall. Then all of a sudden, you hear the mortified screams of his mother as she discovers the decapitated body of her daughter. It then cuts to a harrowing shot of Charlie's battered and decapitated head lying on the side of the road, crawling with ants from head to toe. Well, just the head, I guess. There's a montage displaying the passage of time, with Annie hysterically crying in her bedroom, begging out for her daughter and screaming that she just wants to die, while Peter stands outside of the room, just as still and emotionless as he was on the night his sister died. It cuts to Charlie being buried, with the continuous sound of the mother's screams. All the while, Peter is standing there as if he's completely detached from reality. We then see Peter back in class, clearly not ready to be in school on such short notice, especially after such a horrific event has occurred. Made further evident as we see Peter smoking with his friends between classes, and it would seem that his emotions have finally caught up to him as he appears to be going into a full-blown panic attack completely out of the blue. Later that night, we see Annie hesitant to enter a grief counselling session, one that she used to attend after the loss of her mother. But as she's about to leave, a friendly woman approaches her from the class, and they both begin to open up to each other about their recent losses, with Annie going as far as to describe what it was like to discover her daughter's headless corpse in the back of her family car. Well, that's one way to break the ice. Later that night, as the family is back at home, Steve walks into Annie's workshop to discover that she's creating a miniature model of the accident scene, decapitated daughter and all. While Steve is quite clearly disgusted at this, according to Annie, it's supposed to be a neutral view of the accident. And well, if it helps her in the grieving process, why not? As you'd expect, after suffering such a sad, brutal tragedy, the family isn't exactly doing so great. To be fair, they weren't doing great beforehand. Tensions are incredibly high between them, made even worse due to the fact that Annie and Peter already had quite the difficult relationship, which is brought to its boiling point when the pair finally explode in a fit of grief and rage, with Annie shouting at Peter for him never taking any responsibility in his life, especially for the accident. But after a long and tense stare, Peter eventually responds with, "What about you, Mum? She didn't want to go to that party, but you made her." A nice healthy family dynamic, I'd say. Annie bumps into her friend from grief counselling, and the woman seems to be completely ecstatic and happy about life, which is in stark contrast to how she was feeling before, after explaining the loss of her son and her grandson. She begins to explain to Annie that she knows all of this sounds completely insane, but a spiritual medium came to her house and allowed her to communicate with her dead grandchild. You're right, that does sound completely insane. She ropes a reluctant Annie into going back to her house to see for herself, and to the complete shock of Annie, it works. The woman is having her grandchild move a glass around the table, as well as spelling out on a chalkboard, "I love you, Granny." Understandably, Annie is quite freaked out due to the prospect of an infant spirit roaming around the house, and decides to get up and leave. But not before the friend explains to her how she can go about performing the ritual herself. I know that it must be tempting to try and communicate with your lost loved one, especially after witnessing that it's possible. But come on, haven't horror movies taught you anything? Later that night, while struggling to sleep, she begins to notice a large amount of ants infesting the room. She follows the trail of insects into her son's room and discovers that they've completely covered his face. All of a sudden, she's woken up to the sound of her son's voice, as it was all just a dream and she was sleepwalking into his room. They begin to argue back and forth with that healthy mother and son relationship they have, until the mother blurts out that she never wanted to have Peter and she did everything that she possibly could in order to have a miscarriage. The next thing we know, the pair are both crying, covered in some sort of liquid, and then a match is lit. Just as the room is engulfed in flames, she wakes up in her own bed. This absolutely terrifying experience must have inspired her to conjure up some more terrifying experiences, as we can hear her behind a door reciting the words to conduct the ritual. She wakes up Steve and Peter and forces them to come downstairs so they can all partake in it together. They're both starting to think that maybe she's gone and lost her marbles after suffering all of this grief. But eventually, the pair decide to humor her and see what this is all about. She attempts to communicate with Charlie using the glass method, and it works. Steve attempts to put a stop to it, and Peter begins to burst out in tears. All of a sudden, during the hecticness of all of this, Annie's body becomes possessed by Charlie, and Charlie begins to talk using her mother's body, calling out for help and saying that she's scared and confused, before eventually being brought out of it by the father splashing water onto her face. I think that's your cue to burn down the house and move far, far away. The next night, after everybody's calmed down after what they've just witnessed, I don't know how you calm down after seeing that, Annie walks into Charlie's bedroom to see that some kind of entity is drawing in Charlie's sketchbook. No kind of ritual has been performed to communicate with whatever this is. This is something else. Whatever they did last night must have invited this thing in. Peter is then woken up to the very distinctive sound of Charlie's clicking tick, to then see her standing there in the corner of his room, watching him. He calls out to her before her head then rolls off her shoulders and across the floor, revealing itself to just be a ball. Out of nowhere, something grabs his head from behind, violently pulling him down onto the bed. But it turns out that it was just a dream, as Peter is woken up by his mother. She explains to him that something is indeed happening here, and she's the only one who can put a stop to it. Annie heads over to retrieve Charlie's sketchbook, where we can see it flipping through its pages, containing multiple pictures of Peter with his eyes scribbled out. Annie takes the book and throws it into the fireplace, but as the book begins to burn, so does she, so she's forced to retrieve the book or else burn to death. After deciding that burning to death isn't her preferred option, Annie decides to go and pay a visit to the lady who introduced her to all of this stuff. She knocks on the door, but to no avail. The woman isn't home. But we as the viewer do get to see inside the apartment, and inside we can see multiple pictures of Peter and several items that belonged to Charlie. There's something going on here, and this woman isn't who she seems to be. Annie starts to get the hint that this woman might be hiding something when she notices a welcome mat, suspiciously similar to the ones her own mother used to make. After realizing that this woman may be linked to her mother in some form, Annie returns home to check through her mother's possessions, where she then discovers a spiritual book about the King of Mischief, King Payman. The book explains that the king will choose the most vulnerable male to possess, and in this household, that would be Peter, because he's a big crybaby. To communicate with Charlie, they've unknowingly made a pact with whatever this is, and they've let it into their home. After rummaging through her mother's things some more, she learns that the pair did in fact know each other after discovering several photos of them both together. Before she died, Annie's mother was clearly involved in something paranormal and chose to keep it hidden from the rest of her family. Which is kind of a jerk move, to be honest, because now your family is suffering because of it. Nice one, Grandma. Presumably to go through more of her things, Annie decides to go up into the attic to have a look around. But as she's up there, she finds a little more than she originally bargained for. That being the headless, decaying corpse of her mother. Remember back at the beginning of the video where I stated, when things kick off, they really kick off. Well, things are about to kick off. We see Peter in class, clearly mentally struggling to deal with what's been going on lately, when suddenly he hears that distinctive click. Then another one, and then another one. All of a sudden, his body begins to violently contort, resulting in him violently smashing his face into his desk. That thing wants Peter, but it seems like it's attempting to break him down first. Steve returns home after picking up Peter from school, and is persuaded by a frantic Annie to go up into the attic because there's a dead body up there. By this point, Steve has clearly started to think that, due to all of this grief, Annie is suffering from some sort of mental health crisis, but he decides to go and take a look up there anyway, only for him to make the discovery himself that there is in fact a headless and decaying corpse in their attic space. In a hectic state, Annie begins to explain the connection between her mother and her friend from grief counselling, trying to get Steve to understand that there's something going on here. But remembering that the grandmother's grave was desecrated, Steve accuses Annie of being the one who dug her up, believing that the sketchbook is the link between them and whatever is causing all of this. Annie attempts to convince Steve to throw it into the fireplace after covering it in gasoline. So she'll be the one to die, but at least it'll put a stop to all of this madness and her family will be safe. Steve has had enough, and at this point, he refuses to entertain her supposed delusions anymore, resulting in Annie taking the book from him and launching it into the fire herself. But this causes Steve to immediately be engulfed in flames, and not Annie. As she stands there, mortified in a complete state of horror, something enters her body and possesses her once more. Where we then get a view of the property from the outside, where we can see that it's surrounded by what appears to be naked people. Something tells me that this isn't the type of naked people party you want to attend. Peter wakes up in the middle of the night, and now we're entering the realm of well and truly creepy paranormal events, as we can see his possessed mother floating and attached to the ceiling behind him, just staring down onto him. How long has that thing been there? That's honestly quite unsettling. Peter slowly turns around, and as he does, we see the figure silently float away without alerting him to its presence. He makes his way downstairs to make the horrifying discovery of his dead father's charred and burnt remains. All the while, that creepy floating entity is once again attached to the ceiling out of view. Peter suddenly turns around to see a naked man standing in the doorway, doing nothing but creepily staring ahead at him, before he is then rushed by the entity in his mother's body and sprints all the way up to the attic. The possessed mother attaches itself to the bottom of the door and begins to repeatedly and violently slam its head into the door. After looking around the attic and seeing a picture of him with his eyes cut out where that corpse once lay, he looks up to see his mother levitating there while cutting through her own neck, each slice increasing with speed. Before then, seeing a group of 3 naked smiling people in the attic with him, and quite understandably, he responds by jumping out of the window and plummeting to the ground below. And as he does, the sound of the mother's slicing neck has reached an all-time high, before it suddenly stops, and then we hear a thud of her head hitting the floor. Well, I guess everyone is just dead now? Well, it's not quite as simple as that, as we see a light enter Peter's either dead or unconscious body as something begins to possess him. He wakes up, gets to his feet, and then he clicks. Charlie has possessed him. Oh, so that's why they gave her a clicking tick. Charlie witnesses the decapitated corpse of her mother float away into her treehouse, a place which in life used to be Charlie's safe space. As she climbs the ladder and enters, she discovers that it's full of these naked people, her headless mother and grandmother, and her mother's grief counselling friend, all kneeling and praying towards some kind of effigy which appears to be made out of Charlie's decaying head. A picture on the wall reveals that her grandmother was a queen at some point in time, before Peter's possessed body is crowned, and Charlie is named as one of the 8 kings of hell. And then the movie just ends. Yeah, Just like you're thinking, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here either, to be honest. It would seem that everything that took place in this movie happened for a reason. Things like Charlie was meant to die, and Annie's friend was supposed to nudge her in the right direction in order for this plan to come to fruition. After uncovering the truth that Charlie was intended to be some kind of king of hell, the movie then opens itself up to repeat viewings, but through a different lens. Not just subtle things like the decapitation foreshadowing, with Charlie creating something out of that bird's head for her own head to be used in something remarkably similar later on, but subtle things like realizing that the grief counseling sessions actually contained people who would in turn later appear at the house naked. Making sense of Annie's estranged relationship with her mother because she was some kind of demon lord creature, and I guess they don't tend to be very nice. There's an awful lot that I haven't mentioned about this movie, but that's the beauty of it. There's so much to go back and uncover for yourself as you attempt to piece together all of these cryptic clues that the movie leaves behind for you. There's just so much going on in the movie. There's even scenes that I either haven't mentioned or have just simply brushed over due to brevity. Because even if you've gone through this whole video and you think that you've taken in everything that this movie has to offer, you haven't, and it's well worth a watch. Before we wrap things up, I'd like to give a big thank you to my patrons. Thank you to Dom, Bort, Hunters263, Caleb Barnaby, Rebecca Pitts, Benz, Total Drama Rebooted, Jakey, A Dandy in Space, Martin Brannan, Natasha Twyman, Rin and Whiskey, Jarrett C. Bees, Nicholas, Pascal Mathis, and Jon. I'm not sure that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. Due to the nature of the content I make, there's a pretty big chance that my videos get demonetized or copyright claimed anyway, so the fact that there are people out there who are willing to financially support what I do is actually incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much, guys. You do more for this channel than you could ever possibly imagine. The channel's also got a Discord, so if you'd like to discuss this movie or other movies in general with like-minded people, there's a place where you can come together and do just that. Also, if you wanted to leave a recommendation for the series, that'd be the best place to go about doing that. So once again, thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you to everyone else for watching.